Welcome to Scare Confident. I'm your host, Tiffany Souter. Okay, this is going to be a fun episode. I have the Hubs back on the podcast. Usually he's just here in April for our anniversary and we do like this marriage checkup. But we were on a walk a couple months ago and I said, I think it would be fun to do like an Ask Me Anything kind of jam. And he said he would do it. And so when I sent the survey out a few weeks ago, asking you what questions you would ask him, that's what we're going to do. We're going to go through some of those today. So, babe, welcome to the show.
Yeah, good to be here. Not exactly sure what I got myself into.
I told him, I said, we'll just go through 3 of them. And he said, they're not just yes and no answers. What would be a yes and no answer question? Do you like Tiffany doing the podcast?
Mostly yes.
What's the no part? I think I know the answer, but
sometimes I'm just like, I shade a little bit more to personal information and confidentiality than you do. We just are at different levels of sharers.
Yep, that's true. Okay, so we're going to jump into a couple of these questions, all right? And he has not seen them, so we'll see how this goes because you're kind of a processor, so we're just kind of doing a surprise attack here. Okay, question number 1. So the question I asked my listeners was, if my husband was to share his perspective, what question would you ask him? So we're going to pick, 3 or 4 of these. The first one is, how do you balance time with your wife plus time with your kids and your friends? Do you kind of just go with the flow, or are you intentional about who you spend time with?
I would say it's gotten to be where I'm intentional about it. I used to just go with the flow and that didn't work quite as well, I would say, in each of those relationships. And now I'm much more intentional about the time of year when we're doing things and getting it on the calendar. And I've had this thought recently, just whether that's friend groups, even family, there's people who are the planners and people who will just show up. And it can even be from a business perspective. There's those who plan, lead, do things to get others involved. And there are others who, will be the willing participants. And, if you plan something that they will be there, but it takes both kinds. But there's a lot fewer of the people who will take the time to actually be thoughtful and plan it out. And so being a lot more intentional in all those areas of life, I think, is something that I've more grown into versus early on, I was more reactive and would wait.
So practically, what are some really specific things that you do? If you said, I'm starting to get more intentional, like what's practical things that you do?
Well, I would say just our annual trip and having more of a business meeting around what we expect the year to look like. Not that it is going to look exactly like that, but maybe an outline of a construct of what it could look like if we were going to look into the future. Same sort of things around kids' activities, getting those on the calendar early, understanding what goes into those events, tournaments, concerts, whatever the activity is. And then, from the work side, just understanding time of year, trips, what typically happens. I've completed 3 full years in my role now. I have a much better idea of what's coming, even though things can happen at the last minute. I've got a pretty good idea. Hey, the first quarter is going to be really busy. So think about the other areas of my life need to be heavier second quarter through fourth quarter than what the first quarter is going to be.
So really practically, so you've obviously our family calendar, we get filled up, but you have friends that you golf with, you have your dad. That's a really important relationship to you. So I guess for people listening, that's our family and that's work, which is some piece of it. But what about your friendships? Are you I know the answer to this, but people want to know, are you a golf once a week? Is it trips? Is it what does it look like?
I would say I'm more a golf once a month with friends and maybe once a month with my dad. And that's currently what I have time for. I enjoy that. I love being outside and in that peaceful environment with all of them and having conversations and jabbing each other and that sort of thing. And, having some competitive activity, depending on who I'm golfing with, going on. I find a lot of enjoyment in that. And then with friends, it's become a lot of my college friends and others are spread all across the country. So it is being thoughtful around when I can get together with them throughout the year. At times, my job takes me to a bunch of different places, letting them know, hey, I'm going to be in town. Are you available? that would be an impromptu visit. But typically it's been like, hey, let's make a long weekend of something and a group of us can get together. Really, at this point in life, it's once, maybe twice a year.
So with the kids, you are not really I know some families, it's like dad takes one kid out for breakfast every Saturday morning, or there's like these big routines that are part of the way a parent stays connected to a kid. That's not like really what it looks like at our house. I think from the older girls, you're really involved in their like activities. I would say you take the lead in our family with their sports. I would say sports activities. Like you really take the lead there. You like for a swim, you know how all the like swim portals work. Like you're just the lead on that stuff. And with Ainsley, as she's wanting to get more competitive, understanding like the coaching landscape and the training opportunities and the things that she needs to get, like you take the lead there. And so I think that's a big part of your interaction and touch points with the big girls. But I don't know that's coming to mind for me, but how would you talk about the way, or how do you think about your time of like, how do you make sure you stay connected to each kid in seasons when you're away a lot and seasons when you're home more?
Yeah, I think it's easier with the activities because I lived that and just knowing what's important, what is seemingly important at that age versus what's actually important, and how I can help and provide advice or listen to them and understanding what they're going through. It's easy for me to relate with them in those areas. So I think that's probably why I tend to go more that route. And it's back to your question on routine and breakfast, and based on just schedules, like anything routine right now where we are in our lives is setting us up for failure. Not that having like routines during the week and knowing what you're going to have happen, that's an important part of like logistically what needs to happen. But for me to promise something to the girls, like, hey, this is what's going to happen every Saturday morning because you've got a gap in your schedule. Like I would never be able to uphold that, like just with my own calendar and what needs to happen. So I feel like we've gotten away for that, or I haven't started that because I know I would be setting myself up for failure for them. So that's just, people have calendars that allow for that, or they know they're going to be free on these days, 50 weeks out of the year or whatever, 40 weeks out of the year. That's great. That's just not feasible for me right now.
Perfect. Well, kind of an adjacent question to this, just like having a job that requires travel. Another question was, do you ever feel guilty about being gone a lot in pursuit of your goals and dreams? And if so, like, how do you address that?
Yeah, I think you've done a good job of talking about what's really important to the girls and understanding what you need to be there for and what they would prefer you were there for. And if I think back to this last year, like I missed one of Aubrey's choir concerts because we had our sales meeting and there was just a bunch going on at work, and I was hosting 100 people essentially in Indianapolis that week. And I just couldn't make it to her concert. But the one before that, she had a solo and there was just no way I was going to miss. I was asked to go somewhere, and 9 times out of 10, I would have said yes, like I needed to go there. But for that specific concert, it was a no, like I had to be there for her as she had that solo. So I think it's easier as they get older and you can talk to them about it, and there's some level of understanding around what you're doing and what you're sacrificing all this for. And not everything is a 10 out of 10 importance level. So I would say that's kind of how I think about it, especially with the older two, just at their ages, that you can talk to them about, hey, these are important tournaments. These are important concerts. Oh, this is going on. So I don't carry a lot of guilt with it. I want to make as many things as possible. And if I can make it, I mean, you've seen me stay for a game when it would have been much easier to drive to Cleveland at noon and get there for a dinner versus skipping the dinner, staying in Indianapolis until 7:30 p.m. and then driving and arriving there at 1:30 in the morning and then having a full day. Like it's just, you have to make choices and trade-offs. And sometimes those are going to say, okay, I need to be here with my family and I don't need as much sleep or whatever it is. Like I can go to the next day tired. And other days it's like, hey, I have to be on my game. I have to get there, and I'll call and talk after whatever the event is and stay as plugged in as possible. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like if you're going to carry guilt around, you could make that very easy on yourself when feeling like guilty for missing any little thing.
Yeah, I think we've done a good job of not necessarily setting their expectations that we're both going to be everything. Like one of the things I think that is important, this is my worldview. Other people don't need to pick this up, but that I would say our kids are an important part of our life, but they aren't necessarily the only important part of our life. And they aren't even the most important thing. Like, I don't know if that sounds terrible to say that out loud, but we are all customers of our time and resources, and they are important. Absolutely. But we all have to sacrifice in different areas of our lives to get everything to happen in this kind of giant life event that we're trying to pull off. And I think the expectation setting for them, and I don't know if we ever did it explicitly or if it's just like environmentally, like we're just not always both at everything. And they're always supported. There's always somebody in the audience that loves them, that is a familiar face. And we want it to be both of us. Ideally, one of us is great. Sometimes it's neither of us, and it's one of our parents or an aunt that they know is, you know, the world's biggest fan. And so I think we've been able to create a sense of community and security for them when it doesn't always have to be just you and me. Because there's times that we want to go do other things. It's like, not even because we have to. You want to do your career. You want to do your job. You want to do a great job at those things.
And I think there's a piece of it too that girls understand, just being in a little bit larger family, right? When you have 3 siblings, you see your parents split up or spend time with another one, and back to like explicit, implicit, like they see that we can't be everywhere all the time and there's different activities going on and we're trying to support people, versus whether you work with people or see people who have one child and it's like all about that kid. And then there's maybe different expectations from the kid. I don't know, not to get way into only child behaviors versus people who have multiple siblings, but I think there is some of that just from an expectation standpoint of the kids or people with multiple siblings.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Okay, we're shifting gears a little bit here. Question is, what's it like to spend your life with a strong and confident woman? And another person said, like, what's it like being married to a woman who has chosen a demanding career? And is this what you pictured when you were younger? That's my question. But what's it like to be married?
It's a tough question because I don't know it differently. And, you know, we try to raise the girls to be strong and confident too. So there's a lot of women around here who are strong and confident. But to try to do my best and answer the question, you know, I think whenever you have a spouse and a teammate in any career or activity, parenting, like, you want that person to be confident in what they're doing and out there and supporting them in their goals and dreams. And that can, again, you do a good job of saying like that can be a lot of different things for a lot of different people. But I feel like your job as like a helpmate is to do your best to support them in whatever they're most naturally inclined to do and to be. You know, that maybe makes it less about me and how I feel about it or think about it. It's when I would say when I'm at my best, we're probably more selfless than selfish about like, hey, this makes it really hard on me to do my job. I could totally feel that way. And there's threads of truth to that. However, that probably doesn't work out real well in the long run if that's like what I decide to hang on to. So
I think if we're gonna, and just be honest, that's the thing to do. Obviously, if you didn't let me be who I am, like it wouldn't work. Like you have to accept people for who they are. But there are trade-offs, and there is a price everybody pays in the household for kind of who I am and what I've chosen. And so I think if there's things that come to mind or you're like, yeah, these are things that would be easier if it wasn't the way it is. That doesn't make what we're doing wrong, but I think giving people an honest look at what are some of the prices you feel like you pay, and then what's some of the, on the other side, maybe what's some of the benefit that you get from, or there's none, and that's fine. I'm open, you know?
yeah, I would say what is hard is when you have 2 people with large careers, you have all the events and like ancillary things that you don't necessarily think about when you're just doing your job, but those can start to build up. And I would say that's probably the largest struggle for me, is it's not what is like directly tied to your job or career, the podcasting and everything that goes along with that. It's more secondary and like tertiary events that we have to go to because of this 2 career life that we've chosen. So that's probably what I find the biggest drag is as somebody who every once in a while just needs to pause and rest and feel like I can take care of myself a little bit. And I get energy from rest versus like going out and being with a bunch of people, whereas you're more extroverted like that. And that gives you a lot of energy to do that. So that to me is probably what is most draining to me. Are there benefits? Absolutely. Like we've gotten to do some really cool events, cool things because of choices that we've made.
Do you feel like on the whole, we've been able to take more risk in our jobs and in our just, I don't know, just like overall risk in our lives and financial profile because we have 2 incomes and because there were like seasons where like one was more secure and the other one was taking more risks and vice versa?
I don't know. I mean, I think about it more just like true like opportunity cost of what we're doing. And at different points, you might think of things as risky, less risky. Like early on in our mid 20s, like, yeah, it was where we were was and what we were attempting was very risky. Starting or doing new things now, I feel like is a little bit less risky just in terms of maybe what we're willing to commit into those new ventures. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but if you're going to take like big swings and big risks, doing that earlier, that was a choice that we made with kind of eyes wide open into that, not exactly knowing where it would go. And not that I'm like totally opposed to ever taking a big swing again, but it's just different when you're in your mid 40s and you have 4 kids.
Okay, last question for today's episode. The question is, I would ask JR, do you, Tiffany, lead with and as much as you encourage your followers to do? Do I live the life as intentionally and maybe, I don't know, passionately as I represent other people should do it?
So I would say yes. And I think this is something that if people are listening to the podcast, they hopefully understand this as like, it's still a living document. And like we're figuring out like, yes, there are tools now and there are things that you use and put in place, but it's like ever changing and figuring out, okay, this works, this didn't work. It might work for somebody else. It doesn't work for us. So I feel like there's this constant trial and error or pursuit of and that you definitely live towards and not saying like, you have it all figured out. I think that's misrepresenting. And I don't want to take the question there if they're not saying, by saying, yes, we've got to live in your life of and, to me, that's not saying like you have it all figured out. You're saying you pursue and there's times where it works perfectly and there's times where we get tripped up and we got to go back to the drawing board in certain areas.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming back on, babe. Appreciate you sharing your perspective in this wild life. Do you remember, I feel like when we get in arguments, it's usually over sort of the core of what I'm going to try to like do a Mad Lib here and maybe it will work and maybe it won't. But like when we get in arguments, what's the core usually of it?
I would say there's 2. It's either the other person feels dismissed or lack of respect from one person, or there's just not enough time with each other.
Yeah. And that usually, I feel like it's like this independence that we fall back into and out of this sense of like reliance and listening and being a team. It's like when we're out of sync, we kind of go back to individual contributors. And I feel like whenever we're like, okay, we're in bad patterns, we've got to get back on track, you'll always say, what was the thing you were most attracted to when you met me? Do you remember this? Hopefully, yes.
Well, I mean, there's just so many, but.
No, come on, don't be patronizing.
Independence.
And my confidence. You're just like so confident. So I'm like, I know it's a thing with me, but it can become unhealthy where I function alone and I like move forward without you, or I think I have all the context and I don't. So anyway, my point in saying all of that is it is true. I always have another idea. It is true. I always have another thing that I'm wanting to do. I have had to learn, even in my natural pursuit of a life of and, JR is wildly discerning. It's definitely one of his greatest talents in life is to be very discerning. And not putting him in the game of being a wet blanket on all of my dreams and all of my life of and, but making sure that we actually are able to lay pavement and like move forward and not just jump from thing to thing to thing. So I guess I say all of that of like, this is definitely a team sport. I am good at the and I think sometimes you are helpful at helping me stay focused on the things I've already committed to, because right now might not be the time for that. And I think that you've taught me that of like, how do you make sure that you have capacity for the thing that you want to say yes to next? So anyways, this marriage thing is definitely a team sport. We are perfectly imperfect, but I would choose this with you every time. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on another episode of Scared Confident. Until next time, keep telling fear, you will not decide what happens in my life. I will.